Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn Richard, also known as The Awakening with Dawn, and this is the Wake Up to Real Love podcast, where we share stories of struggles and triumphs in love, sex, and relationships, along with expert advice to create more conscious connections. I'm doing something a little new this time. I'm really excited to welcome back my guest, Tyson Adams. He is a men's coach who helps his clients outgrow their unwanted pornography and sexual addictions through shadow work. He's approaching 3 years of being addiction-free, and he's developed a somatic process and philosophy and upcoming new online courses for men and to break through and overcome their own habits, and also for women and partners to help with their partners overcome those habits. We had so much to talk about last time that we had to talk more. So welcome back, Tyson Adams.
Thank you, Dawn. It's so great to be here.
I was just telling you, I listened back to our episode and it was like there was so much wisdom, so many things that I know that men struggle with, and that women who are partners with men who deal with sexual and pornography addictions. It's really challenging because you feel alone and you feel maybe ashamed to talk about it, both if you're the one having the addiction or the struggle and issue, or if you're a partner of the one. So just can you remind people, I'm going to just dive right in because we really talked about the shadows. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because we sort of touched on it, but now I want to dive deeply into it and really talk about how to help people overcome them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, the thing that I can share is that I'm deeply empathetic to it because
Yes.
because I've personally had that struggle and been through it. I think there are a lot of therapists and addiction specialists that within the therapeutic, let's just say, lens or the rules and regulations, they just have you show up and share all of your problems and all of your things that you're going through, and then they provide their therapeutic process. But the way in which I coach and the way in which I think this sort of movement is moving towards is a lot more relational, which is to say, hey, I know what it's like. I've been in relationship, I've been out of relationship, I've used porn to cope with a breakup or heartbreak. I've been in relationships where there was dysfunction or loneliness or sadness or anger, and I've used it to cope. I know what it's like to use it to get over a woman, in the breakup process. I know what it's like to use it when I'm, numbing, or when I'm sad, or when I'm sick, or a number of different reasons why I would go to that particular modality to soothe myself, to feel better, to de-stress. And because of that, I think I create an opportunity to be real with men, and potentially also women that are also hearing this, which is to say, this is something that's plaguing society as a whole. And now that I'm, reached 3 years without consuming it, there is a path out of that. And it takes work, it takes time and energy and effort in deconstructing the psyche and the shadows within, but it is possible. And so I think that that's really the importance here is that this is a relational construct, not a therapeutic sort of setting where there's no vulnerability on the side of the person that is you're seeking to get some advice from, or some help, or some assistance from.
Right. And can you remind our listeners, in case they missed our first episode, about what was your breaking point that that made you realize, hey, this isn't working for me anymore?
Yeah, I think it was just the yo-yo of relationships. I mean, in my adult life, since the time I was 18, I had 10 primary monogamous journeys, from a year or up to 3 years. And I think that the reason why that's important to share is that I wanted it to work. I wanted to find that right connection and that right partner that was safe, and that there was that secure attachment. And yet, for whatever reason, I was moving in and out of these things with all kinds of heartache and heartbreak. And the constant theme through that was an unresolved of sexual dysfunction in my system and in my body. And I think that that had a tremendous part of why I was oscillating in and out, and why things were in some cases very dramatic, and in some cases very unsafe, and in some cases just chaotic. And I didn't understand why. And so the only way that I could get clarity on that was to, it's to remove. It's almost like going on a diet, right? Like, let's do the elimination diet. Let's remove everything out of the system, and then we'll reintroduce things slowly to see, what am I allergic to? What am I not? It's kind of that same concept. And that was really the one piece that I hadn't fully looked at directly and said, yes, I'm going to remove this and see how my life changes. And lo and behold, of course, as soon as that component was cleared up and was not in my system, it wasn't operating, I was attracting very different types of women. I was attracting women that I had never been attracted to in the past, and there was a lot more just peace and calmness in my system. I also perceived that all women, including my partners, were in more safe. They felt more safe with me as well, because I had eliminated that. So I think on an energetic level, there was also something that was happening that I wasn't aware of, but that once I eliminated that, it became very clear that that was what was between myself and my partner, and that was a dysfunction there.
Well, as I was listening back to our previous conversation, you said something that on average, boys between the ages of 8 and 11 are exposed to porn,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I'm thinking of when my kids were 8. They're really babies, and to have them exposed to something so adult is really traumatic, actually. It's like developmentally completely inappropriate to be exposed to that kind of stuff at such a young age.
Oh yeah, there's a good friend of mine who has a son, who his son came home recently, and some boy at school had showed him, and that was a traumatic experience that he saw that. And so this father was helping him process that. And I think it's really, really important. If you are a parent, there are softwares, VPN blockers, to put on your own children's devices, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their friends are having those blocks. And so I think
Right.
it's really important to have those really hard conversations with your children. And I actually hope to create a guide for that. I think that there's a big need for parents to know how to have that conversation with their sons and daughters in and around when somebody comes to them and shows them something that doesn't feel good in their body. I mean, it doesn't register or what have you,
Mm-hmm.
because that creates an excitation, and then that ends up being the bar to which we process that a sexual experience needs to be, um,
Right.
as opposed to being connected. It's off the radar, right? And it's not appropriate for children. So I think that that's a huge need in society, and I definitely plan to create some sort of a guide and course for parents to speak to their children about protecting themselves.
Well, and I would imagine, your peers, probably your parents didn't talk to you about it either.
No, 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 no.
Yeah. So it's this hush hush. We're sort of ashamed, but we're super curious, and we're interested because we want to know about these things, but we're doing it in a very disturbing, non-reality based way.
Yeah, and it's getting worse. I mean, the thing that I've been really researching a lot lately is you look at the virtual reality world and the sex
Uh-huh.
industry. And what you're going to see is, especially in Japan, you have sex dolls and virtual reality merging, where they're actually not preferring to be in partnership. They have marriages that are sexless, but then they have these outlets which are these fake worlds, this thing that they live in, which is very disconnecting. And there's all kinds of neurological and brain problems with that, which is that they don't understand how to co-regulate with another human being, and so
Hmm.
we're getting more and more detached from our own body,
Disconnected.
disconnected. Yeah, so it's going to get worse. And yeah, I want to be a part of the movement that says, hey, like, we've normalized it, and actually we need to really address this as a culture and as a society.
And so what, I mean, where do you start?
Yeah, so where I'm starting is now that fortunately, I'm a business development consultant, and so I actually help a lot of people launch their online courses and run social media to those courses.
Hmm.
And because I've had good success with my clients, I realized, well, there's no reason why I shouldn't do this for myself.
Yeah.
And when I say myself, I don't mean for me, I mean for humanity, but
Yeah.
I feel that it's imperative that I do that. It doesn't even feel necessarily like a choice anymore. Now that I'm reached this place, I have to do it. And so I have all of the online skills to do it, and now it's just a matter of having the guts to sit in front of the camera, to tell my story, to empathize with men, and to say, "Hey, there's a way out of this." And so, what I plan to do, and I've built out the wireframe for it, which I shared with you, and ultimately, I have a team that's going to help me do this, but I'm going to have kind of three different options for people. So if men, whether they're single or partnered, I'm going to have different communication strategies for each of them. But ultimately, people, if a man has a relationship problem, my experience and my assumption is they don't necessarily immediately connect the dot that porn is the problem. They wouldn't necessarily connect that dot. They may, but they probably don't. And so what it's important for me is communicating to them what their problem is. And people have love and relationship issues, and so that's really what I'm focused on. So if you're single, attract your partner, attract the partner of your dreams. Are you having these problems? I can help with that. Okay. If you are a man and you're in partnership, is your relationship starting to stray, or are you starting to stray, or is there division between you? Is the communication not there? And focusing on, hey, would you like to deepen your intimacy with your partner? And so those communication strategies are really looking at this inherent and fundamental need that men and women have, which is to feel love and to feel safe and to feel connected. And then once we have established that connection, which is, hey, that's what I really want for you, is to be in relationship with another human being and to have that be thriving and be well. Have you thought about the possibility that your pornography consumption and or addiction or habit, or however you classify it,
Hmm.
might be what is getting in the way of that connection or that capacity for you to manifest that life? Because that's what it was for me. And then when I removed that, all of these things started to happen. And it wasn't just the relationship piece, although I think that that's the main piece, but there's also um, energy, career, finances. All of those other things started to fall in place because I wasn't draining my life force energy with these types of negative things, these pornographic images and this pornographic mindset. And so once I've established that sort of framework through some videos and some text, then there's going to be three options for people. So for people that can't afford, it's going to be a $300 do it yourself course. For people that can't actually afford that, that's no problem. It's going to be pay what you want. So in order to do the pay what you want model, you have to send me a physical letter in the mail saying this is the price I want to pay, whether that's free or whether that's $100 or whatever. And they have to actually take action. And once I receive that, I'll send them an email and say, hey, here's your code, get the course. I don't want anybody to not be able to get it. And then for people that just want to pay for it, great. And then there'll be another option, which is it's a 6-week course, but the other option would be for me to walk people through that and do that course together with um, 6 sessions where we meet for an hour and we actually talk about that information, and I walk them through on a more personal level, and that will be at a higher price point. So that's what I'm working
Hmm.
on the side with my other client work, because this needs to happen. This is a huge, huge thing. And ultimately, like, I deeply, deeply care about the evolution of masculinity, not just here in America, but on planet Earth. And I think I may have mentioned it in our last podcast, which was that when I was in Laos and I lived there, and I had a cafe, and there was one day when I came outside and there was two boys and they had a blanket over their head, and of course I took it off and they were watching pornography. And so when I say that this is a global, planetary issue, like, I mean that. Like,
Yeah.
masculinity needs to evolve because our boys are being raised with sexual education that is pornographic, and it is absolutely totally not the way that will allow for them to have deep and vulnerable and connected relationships with their potential partners, regardless of their sexual preference, but just in general.
Well, I think that that's why it's been such a big issue all over the world, because, this is why I wanted to start this podcast, is because I feel like, there are certain subjects that have always been taboo to
Yep.
talk about. And, in the past, like 50 years or so, people have been more upfront about talking about alcoholism and other drug addictions and depression and anxiety. And I feel like sex and relationships are sort of the final frontier, that we only talk about those things when we're in crisis mode. And that's when you come to the therapist,
Yep.
but that's why your work is so important. That's why I show up to do this. And when you said, this is not an option, I have to do this. Like, I
Yeah.
feel called to do this. I feel compelled to do this. It's one of those things, like, it doesn't really matter if I get paid or how I get paid or what I get paid. It's just
Yeah.
that I know that this is my work that I am here to do, to
Yeah.
help people create this sense of, which we talked about, love and acceptance for ourselves, as opposed to isolating and feeling alone, which is often what these addictions or challenges or issues or whatever you want to call them, that's what they do. They make us feel those shadows, which we're going to talk about more, the shadows of feeling alone or ashamed or judged or criticized or devalued, or all of those things that make us feel separate.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point. Yeah. And, feeling called to something so strongly because of its own impact on my own family, but then also what I see happening on a global scale, and how I
Mhm.
see the Me Too movement, really women raising up, having their voices, being angry, but then now kind of coming forth, um, and saying, actually, we really want and desire and need for our men to show up. And I
Mhm.
think that that's really this next wave, which is that men and women need to come together and to work through this, because this is we're working through thousands of years of property of women and just all kinds of things that are really difficult. And I think the one thing that stuck out um, when you were talking about addiction as it relates to drugs and alcohol and a number of things, I think, it's very obvious drinking and driving causes accidents, causes deaths, and so we need to put an issue on this. But the fact that pornography is legal after a certain age, I understand that. Like, I get that.
You're an
However,
adult, you can make your own choice.
sure, you can make your own choice, but I think what we don't necessarily uh, really consider is that those that are exposed to pornography, especially violent pornography, and those that are exposed to it before they're ready to, or they're young children, it
Uh-huh.
creates them to be vulnerable to sexual abuse, and it also creates violence and the way in which abusers abuse children. And so I think it's one of those things that still is taboo, and it's accepted and normalized, but it really does permeate an energy at a collective level that needs to be addressed head on. And we really need to begin evolving beyond that, and seeing that this is not helpful for humanity, and that this is the strongest addiction. I think I mentioned this in the first one, but I'll
Yeah.
say it again. An orgasm with sex is it's like heroin in the veins. As far as the brain activity goes, it is the most addictive thing that we do. And so I think when we remove that, all those other addictions also start to release the grip on the individual and on their body and on their somatic nervous system as well.
And do you think that most people that consume pornography, they just have no recognition that it's affecting their relationship in any way? It's like they try to keep that part of their life compartmentalized.
They do. Yeah, it's very much so compartmentalized. It's as if, well, I mean, it's ultimately it's operating in the shadow, right? The way,
Right.
and I'm sure we're going to get into some shame here, but ultimately, and I sent you this longer thing that I had written, but I look at it sort of like healthy shame, unhealthy, and then toxic. And
Right.
healthy shame would effectively say, oh, when I watch that, I don't feel good in my body, and so I'm not going to do that. And then unhealthy shame would operate where we begin to ignore that body response, over the course of a long period of time. And then when it turns into toxic, it actually develops into something that we crave. We actually crave the unhealthy shame. We crave that we fetishize it effectively. We actually end up eroticizing that shame that doesn't feel good, and then we end up taking it further. And then the problem with that is when you go down that sort of porn trap, which is, it just gets weirder and weirder and darker, then that actual shame actually it sort of snowballs on itself, and it gets even bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I think that, yes, most people have to compartmentalize that, and they just lock it away, and they act as if that doesn't exist, and that,
Hmm.
why is my relationship suffering? Like, I'm going to go do marital counseling, I'm going to read this self-help book, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to whatever, all the while this over here is just this, that's behind closed doors, that's locked away, and they don't see that connection, and they refuse to see that connection. And so that's really the hero's journey of this whole helping of men and women, which is to bridge that gap, to say, hey, there's a relationship between these two things, and they don't operate mutually exclusive. These are inclusive of each other, and they affect each other. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, because all of your thoughts and all of your emotions, they all, and your bodily system, they all affect one another. And so,
Yep.
how can you not consume whatever it is, whatever the substance is?
Yep.
How can it not affect the rest of you because it's affecting you as a whole?
Yep. Yep.
And so, I
Yeah.
mean, there are even marriages who have sex and think, well, it's okay,
Mhm.
and this is just something I do over there, but then I come back to my partner.
Sure. And I think that what I've noticed in myself, and what I've learned through working with my clients, is it's a pornographic style of relating. It's like PSR is what they call it. And
Hmm.
so effectively, even if you compartmentalize that and you think they're not affecting each other, when you're out in society with your partner, of course, men, we're very visual creatures. So, a beautiful woman walks by, we're going to look. But there's a difference between, well, first of all, your partner is going to pick up on all of that energetically. They're going to pick up on that, they're going to see that, they're going to know it, and they're either going to address it with you, or they're going to not address it with you. And if they
Right.
don't address it with you, then it creates just a tiny little chip of division between the trust there, and that begins to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. But in addition, if it is addressed and there's defensiveness, because there often is, because if a partner's bringing it out to us, it creates shame in the
Right.
man,
Right.
then that creates a riff, and it's just like, go away. And so ultimately, when we remove the pornographic mindset, the PSR, the pornographic style of relating, then when we see, even if I'm alone or single, or excuse me, not single, but like if I'm not with my partner versus when I am with her, um, I can see an attractive woman and I can have her in my visual field, but I don't take it into that pornographic state. I can feel that energy, understand that energy, and appreciate it, but bring it into the heart space as opposed to into an erotic sexual state. And there's a very different vibrational frequency that when you're outside of that lens and outside of that mindset, where you can control yourself, and you, what you used to do, which was to basically see that woman as an object effectively, which is very similar to what happens to your mind as it's being reprogrammed by the computer, which is, it's just an objective experience. You're just observing it as like a voyeur. So that is a really, really huge component of why those things are connected, and men just don't see it. They don't get that.
Well, and while you were talking, I was also thinking about, when you say that it's eroticized versus moving in the heart, a lot of men would probably say, well, what's the big deal? It's it's erotic. It makes me excited. It makes me want to have more sex. What's the matter with that if I bring that back to my partner? Because, my partner already has my heart, or maybe even that's not even a big consideration for the guy.
Sure. I mean, I would say two things. The question for those types of men would be, how do you feel when you're with your partner and some guy looks her up and down and does that same thing? How does that make your body feel? Are you even aware, or does that arouse you? And if it arouses you, well, what does that say about your energy and your story, right?
Uh-huh,
And so I
uh-huh.
think that ultimately, for me, when I'm in those situations and I am with my partner and I know that she's being objectified, and there's a man that is using a pornographic, style relating to whatever he's thinking, I can feel that because it's familiar to me in my own system. And so I
Mhm.
think that is a way for you to check yourself. Like, why is it okay? Why is it okay for me to do that, but it's not okay for another man to do that to my partner?
Mhm.
So,
Well,
right.
and that's the thing too that I think about is every woman who's involved in pornography, they're somebody's sister or daughter or mother or cousin
Absolutely.
or something. And so, I mean, this is something that I would ask my ex. It's like, what if your daughter was doing that? What if she ends up doing that? Like, how would you feel about that? Like, ugh! As a parent, you would think, oh my God, no.
A great example, one of my best friends, he was a teacher, and here he is. The woman, she had graduated because he's taught like high school
Hmm.
seniors, and 2 years later he's consuming pornography, and there she is, she's the hitchhiker in the pornography. And it just blew him wide open, and he shut the computer, and that was the day that he walked away from it. And I think the reason why that's important is just to say that these are people, these are real humans. He obviously had a relationship with this individual, and so I
Uh-huh.
think that that's a really, really um, inconvenient part of waking up, and for a man to really own that and understand that.
Hmm.
And then in this particular case, it was it, it was apparent to him that there was some unsettledness within her system as it related to her family and all kinds of things. And so then you think, well, why am I contributing to that? Why is that okay for me to support this particular type of thing? These are real humans, and I think that that's another layer of it that is like really, really important.
Hmm. And also what you said before about, you know, the more that you consume, it's like anything, sugar or a drug or alcohol, the more you consume, the more you need to get that same high.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Once the brain has experienced a certain type of excitation, then we're trying to get back there, and that's really the foundation of a lot of people's trauma too, especially those that their innocence was taken at a very young age, and they did have somebody that has had sexual abuse.
Hmm.
That I always say that if you've experienced that and the excitation was there, even though it's inappropriate, that doesn't mean that our physical bodies didn't respond to that very act. And so what ends up happening is we have this um, threshold, or this sort of capacity inside of us of that excitation. And so we're chasing that chemical response as well. And that turns into the ways in which we would, of course, attract certain types of partners and move through certain types of sexual experiences. You have the whole dominatrix and all of the submissive and that kind of world. And I think that often is a product of trauma, where you're trying to chase that chemical experience because it's still locked in the body, and we need that drug in order to get to that place again.
And is there a way to still, because people may just want to explore those aspects of themselves that have been unexplored,
Sure.
but in a completely safe and trusting environment.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question and a wonderful point. And I think that in a in a securely attached monogamous relationship, I think that is possible, which is to say, hey, when we were having a conversation the other day about this, I noticed that this fantasy that I have is not something that I shared with you, and it's creating excitation in me. And, and I want to bring that up, and I want to share that and speak about that. And then there is a possibility that one can do that, can explore that, but from a place of safety. I mean, there's there's uh, there's a fight or flight experience that's going
Hmm.
to happen when we take it too far. And I
Hmm.
think that you can explore certain types of fantasies within the threshold where your body is not trying to disassociate and trying to leave and trying to go to that heightened
Right.
state. And so I think that, yeah, in a lot of ways, it's extremely important. The problem that I see though is you have a lot of gurus and these sex men that are sort of sex experts, and they want to help these women with their traumas. And so they lead women into these places of saying, okay, well, what is your fantasy? I will act that out for you, with you, in order for you to overcome this thing that, is there. And what ends up happening is that it actually further traumatizes them.
Yeah.
It actually makes it worse
Yeah.
because it brings it up. And so what is posed as healing and is posed as something that's going to reorient, it actually takes them more and more away from their body, because they get into that moment and then they want to get away from the original abuser, but then here's this man who's trying to help them. But it ends up being that it's just a recreation of that abuse, but in a different framework of language.
Right.
And I really, I see that as spiritual bypassing. It's absolutely something that women need to be aware of. It absolutely happens. I know numerous men and women that have, or I've known numerous women that have reported to me of certain men that have done that. And there's these types of communities in Southern California where they kind of invite that kind of experience. And I just say, be careful. I mean, I
Mhm.
really do. I don't think those things are about connection. I think that those things are about power and control. And I
Right.
think that they ultimately feed the egoic nature of the man, and he ultimately is recreating some of his own traumas, and seeking to be powerful and seeking to be exploitive, as a recreation of his own powerlessness as a boy, ultimately.
Well, and that's something that you talked about as well. Your friend, is his name Jay,
Yes, Jay.
that did the research on the type of pornography that people consume is related to um, their wounding,
They're
their
wounding.
childhood wounding.
Yeah,
You want
yeah.
to talk a little bit more about that, and then we can sort of
Sure.
segue into talking more about the shadows, because that's what this is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, ultimately it's that your porn preference has a direct correlation to your attachment style and to your wounding. So, men that have had very controlling and abusive and authoritarian fathers would gravitate towards, because they're feeling powerless, they would gravitate towards wanting to feel powerful, and therefore they would pick pornography where the woman would be subservient to them in race and in size and those types of things, versus a man who has more enmeshed experience with mother, um, would be more uh, drawn towards mother type experiences, or porn where they're being dominated because of the nature of that exchange. And so he studied 1,300 people over the course of many years, and he was able to make
Hmm.
these correlations through the therapeutic process of unfolding their and diving deep into their traumas, and understanding that, yeah, your preference is in direct proportion, and therefore there's an eroticized wound that's happening, and that ultimately drives your porn, and also the types of porn, or excuse me, the types of partners that you would choose, or the types of sexual experiences that you would want.
Right. And it's really, I feel like it's such an internal conflict, because it's that thing of, um, even if you had traumatic experiences and your body reacted in an excited way, it's like, wait, this doesn't make sense. And so I'm sure that a lot of this work is about unraveling the paradox of it all.
Sure. Yeah. And I walk my clients through several processes, one more messy process and then one more calm process. I don't remember if I covered that before, but I'll just briefly say that it's important to cover it twice, regardless if I said it in the first podcast. But, you know, moving through, when you have an excitation and you think that you're horny, like, check yourself out. Like, am I really horny, or am I really sad, angry, numb, whatever? And then
Right.
if you are, there's a way to do a conscious rant, yell, scream, do whatever you need to do without losing yourself. Don't disassociate, but move through the energy for whatever amount of time by jumping and yelling and screaming and being filterless, so that that energy can move out of the body. And once that's out of the body, then we can check back in. What's going on here? Am I actually in a state of arousal, or am I in a state of, whatever?
Panic.
And panic, that kind of thing. And then a more subtle way to do that is if, you don't feel like that's your way, but laying down, entering kind of a more meditative breath state and moving that energy out of the erotic zone of the, the bottom chakra, or however you want to talk about it, the sort of the pelvic floor, and moving that energy up the spine, it through a visual experience and over the top of the head, grabbing those fantasies, bringing them into a color, and then of course exhaling them and releasing them, and allowing your body to function as it may do, which is, a man might be having erections coming and going, and really just allowing that energy to transmute and exit the body without needing to go to the actual masturbatory experience or the pornography experience to ejaculate to get it to go out.
Mhm.
So it's learning the skills to kind of transmute that energy instead of eroticize it.
Well, and that's all about your poem that you wrote about
Yes.
your period penis
Yes.
period.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
um, that well, you can just give a little summary. I mean, you said you
Yeah.
read it last time, but can you give a little summary of what it's about?
It's just really to help men to be aware that this thing that as boys we grew up going, it has a mind of its own, which
Mm-hmm.
is a cultural thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a true statement. This thing is just as much you as your heart, as your fingers, as your hair, as your eyes. So don't think about it as its own thing. It is not a means to an end for you, meaning if you have emotional turmoil, that's not the way to deal with it. Effectively, because that's just, it's going to come back. It's not the solution to overcoming whatever emotions we have inside. So, and
Right.
then of course that next step is that if you are doing that, which I was for the bulk of my life, your partners become an extension of that, where they just feel used and they feel like just as a receptacle for your sexual experience, and that doesn't feel good to them. So
Mm-hmm.
that's important, to treat them as an end and not as a means as well, which is an extension of how you're treating yourself and your own body.
And do you feel like from your experience, were you wanting the connection? I mean, because you've talked about connection, you've mentioned it a few times. It's like, do men, because there's this thing like men want sex just for sex sake,
Sure.
whereas women stereotypically want sex more for the connection.
Sure. I think underneath it all, we both want the same thing, men and women. It's
Uh-huh.
just that there's more shield, there's more just
Armor.
armor. There's more armor. I
Yeah.
mean, big boys don't cry. We've all heard it. So anytime we dip into a vulnerable state, we clam up and we don't want to share that. Whereas for me, I'm actually quite expressive. I cry regularly, and I think that's I'm not in that state of needing to protect the self and protect the image of myself. I'm so willing to show up and be vulnerable inside of a relationship, and
Mm-hmm.
even in my male friendships as well. And I think that's really the underlying issue is that once men can move through that, then the need's the same, which is connection, which is
Mm-hmm.
love and belonging, feeling safe, feeling true love, being authentic with one's partner. And I don't think many people ever get there, and many people in marriages will be in marriages their whole lives and still not really penetrate that and have that type of authenticity.
Yeah, well, I think that's because people aren't willing to face themselves, right? I mean, this is all about dealing with your shadows and and integrating all of the different aspects of you, the things that are scary, the things that make you feel badly, the things that make you feel alone and isolated, the things
Yeah.
that make you feel ashamed or judged or criticized, all of those things that, you know, people try to put on a brave face. People try to wear this mask like everything's okay. I'm okay. I've got it covered. I can deal with it. I can handle all the pressures and the stress and the responsibilities of everything that I'm trying to manage in my life. And, um, and I'm okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's well said. I think that's spot on. And that was me for the bulk of my life until I decided to wake up and penetrate that and really move through that. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
we as a collective are doing that. I think it's becoming more and more with social media and more people being open and honest. I think it's permitting that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's also a shadow that's also collective within social media and within this, which is some people are doing it and they're breaking free, and some people it's taking them deeper and deeper into that egoic shadow space, which is that whatever they're doing is just creating more of that casing around them, around
Mm-hmm.
it's just, and especially if they develop large followings or or start to have people that start to pay them, it creates even a deeper issue. So I think it's really how you use it, ultimately, a relationship or sort of social media as a whole. And our exchanges, the reason why they're so wonderful and authentic is because you and I are both showing up and we're both wanting to get to the core of it, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why our conversations flow, at least from my perspective, so
Mine
authentically.
too. Mine too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, because I feel like, I mean, even last night and this morning, I was completely judging myself for not having my website done, for not being on social media enough, for not really comparing myself, but just sort of saying, I I want to. I'm compelled to do this work, and I'm showing up
Sure.
in this particular way, and I know, like, because the work that I want to do is helping people overcome their heartbreak and betrayal. And that's all about facing your shadows and facing the ways that you weren't a good partner, um,
Mhm.
or facing the ways that you allowed yourself to be mistreated by a partner. And um, and I've been working on it for a long time, and yet I still feel like I'm not really doing the work, right? Because I have a lot of these other things that I'm trying to take care of. And so, when you try to, one, figure out your mission and your purpose. Why am I here? Why was I given the gifts and talents that I was given? Why was I given the interests and desires that I was given? Why? How am I able to help people um, create better lives for themselves? Based on the ways that I struggled and the ways that I was hurt and heartbroken. I mean, this is why your work is going to be so valuable, because you've experienced it all. And so you're coming to this place of having the empathy and saying, been there, done that. I
Yep.
know, I know how, I know the high that it gave me. And I also know the sense of isolation and disconnection that I felt while doing it. And so how can I deal with my shadows and say, I'm not okay, but it's okay.
Yep.
There are things that I need to work on. There are things that I need to address in myself so that I become a clearer receptacle, so that I can be clean and clear in both the energy that I give and the energy that I want to take in.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. um Two things. One is, more than happy to schedule another call for an hour and help you with your website. That's the idea. So I would love to help you with that. And the second thing is yeah, I think that when we start any new life or any new project, it becomes all encompassing, and ultimately this, at least from my perspective on your show, it's amazing, but you're having all of these conversations as well. And so there's the work, which is to actually put it out to the world. But then there's also the internal work, which is that all of these conversations, I would assume, are arising and percolating and bringing out all of this new
Yeah.
way of existing and being,
Yeah.
and so I empathize with that, because it's quite the conundrum when we have to chop wood and carry water and, new life, but still, strive for, reaching this self-actualization and this awareness, and moving through shadows, and talking to other people that are on that same path. And it's a conundrum to be quite honest sometimes. And it's coming
Well,
back to the center, and focusing and all that.
well, and I never feel like you arrive at the destination. It's not an arrival. It's like you're just on this journey. And so
Yeah.
where am I on this journey? And I just keep, I mean, I actually, I have somebody who's been helping me with my website.
Okay,
And I
cool.
said this morning, I was like, I've done nothing since I talked to you a month and a half ago. And she's like, and you're judging yourself for it. And I was like, completely. And
Yeah.
so it was more like, you know what? We all sort of go through these ebbs and flows of life, right?
Mhm.
Just as winter, the
Yep.
leaves fall, the tree branches droop,
Yep.
and the earth, provides the substance to reroot.
Yeah.
And I feel like all of these things help us rediscover more of who we are,
Mm-hmm.
rediscover our truth. And and this is why it's so important to face the struggles.
Yep.
This is why I want to have these conversations, to normalize them,
Yep.
because people think I'm all alone in my struggles
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know how to deal with them, or there's no hope for me. I'm just going to continue to be addicted to porn and it affect my relationships. And this is just how it is.
Yep.
And, my penis has a mind of its own. It always has, it always will. And
Yeah.
so, that's why these conversations to me are so important, because you have found a better way.
Yeah.
You have found a way that's more meaningful and provides you with a sense of not just the erotic part of your relationship that you want, but all the other stuff, the safety, the trust, the connection, the sense of belonging, the sense of value and worth,
Mm-hmm.
in ways that you can't, you can't get those things by yourself. I mean, you can, but you can't. I feel like, you have to take care of your own tree,
Yeah.
right? But even the trees, there's not one tree that stands alone.
Yeah.
The whole forest is filled with deep roots and sharing of nutrients.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like we're all here to do. We're all here to share and connect and help each other live this most amazing, beautiful life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow, I totally agree. And as it relates to support, I think it's so crucial to have a coach, to have a therapist, to have a confidant, not necessarily a friend, because a friend, I mean, yes, we can share some intimate things and it's great, but I think it's important to have somebody outside of that you pay, because it really forces you to show up and actually to be
Mhm.
vulnerable and to not waste your money and your time. And um, with the right person, you can, the things that you think you're going to take to the grave, the things that you don't want to tell anybody, those things can
Right.
be unpacked and healed and worked with and that kind of thing. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So should we talk a little bit more about shadows? And because we were discussing, via messenger, like, okay, what do the shadows teach you?
Sure.
So that the shadows are not toxic. The shadows, they become healthy, ways that can propel us to greater growth.
Sure. Yeah, I think the most important thing is mm, sometimes people get, for me, I kind of track all of my different players. Okay, so kind of have, I have the victim boy, I have my controller, I have my protector, I have sort of my entrepreneur, my teacher, and then I also have my lover and my, I have a lot of different parts of me,
Parts, right?
this work,
The
right? And I
gestalt.
think, yeah, exactly. And so the way to think about it is that um, a good way to examine it would be to say, okay, you have my friend, he's amazing at shadow work. I think I shared some podcasts, Connor. So he describes it as there's a long table and all of those parts are there. And maybe you can see them as like little yous,
Uh-huh.
little boy Tysons. And so if you're going to ignore any of those, of course, what, does any little child do? Or they're going to act out. They're going to
Stand up and
say,
stomp on the table.
yeah, they're going to do all kinds of things. They're going to do whatever they want ultimately because they're self-absorbed and they're kids. They're trying to learn boundaries and all that kind of thing. So I think what happens to people is they don't understand that they're fused with one particular uh, voice or one particular part of
Aspect,
themselves,
right?
one aspect, one mask, one shadow, that they're interfacing with the entire world. They're even interfacing with themselves. And so in order for an individual to move beyond that, it's to understand and to be grateful for that, to be in relationship to the particular parts of ourselves that have protected us from whatever it needed, which has manifested into some form of behavior that, let's just say, we don't really want to accept about ourselves or be accountable for in ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And then when we can begin to unfuse from that, we can relate to it instead of from it. And when we're relating from it, we're just fused with it and we don't know we're operating from shadow. But when we can step out from that, then we can realize that we're not that thought and that we're not that, but we are ultimately something, a much greater awareness, which holds all of those parts of us. And when we can begin to track ourselves, we can go, oh, there's the part of me that is a little boy that's very, whatever. And then relating to that. So one example that I do to help myself, and I'm going to build this a part of my course, is you can actually get an actual stuffed animal if you want to, but if you don't want to, you can just use a pillow. But the point is to project your little boy at whatever age you want him to be, whether that's infant all the way through, being a teenager, like on your chest, the way in which you would love if you have your own son, or if you were loving some, child innocently. And it's to project that individual there, and then to soothe and to be there with that, and then actually to have conversations with that boy and to speak to him, and then to allow him to speak back to you, and to begin a dialogue with those particular parts of yourself that ultimately have been pushed away, disowned, isolated, neglected, or whatever.
Mhm.
And to say, hey, I really want to get to know you, and I'm committed to that, so that you and I can actually have a trusting relationship where you understand that I'm here to protect you, and I'm here to keep you safe, so that none of those hurts and pains and abuses and traumas and neglects are ever going to happen to you again. When we can begin to track and hold our little boy or our little girl, in the case of women, then we can begin to re-enter into relationship from a place where we can actually start to show up for our partner, whereby which we're not only tracking our own little boy or little girl, but we're actually tracking the other person's little boy or little girl. And then from that place, we can really have a foundational, securely attached relationship that actually is co-regulating, instead of just two people regulating themselves and not being able to connect fully. And that is really crucial for interdependence between two individuals,
Right.
as opposed to some sort of independence thing or codependence or enmeshed kind of relationship.
Can you give an example of a 5-year-old little boy and what just one of the issues or shadows the little 5-year-old boy might feel?
Yeah, I mean, big boys don't cry, you know.
Okay.
So an example would be little boy is with his family, maybe all of the, mothers and fathers and sisters, brothers, whatever. And he, uh, he does something that's embarrassing. He drops a glass and it breaks, and he feels embarrassed that he did that, because everybody jumps, and in that moment, he kind of freezes and he tracks everybody to see, how he should respond or not respond, and ultimately, in that moment, he feels himself collapsing into his guilt, into this thing that he did that was careless, right? And in that moment, the men see him collapsing and they deliver this message like big boys don't cry, or some form of that,
Mm-hmm.
which forces the little boy either into blocking that and being able to hold that, or they collapse and they lose their shit and they just cry and cry and cry. And then there's shame that is in that judgment. And usually the women in that scenario, not usually, often the women in that scenario don't necessarily challenge the men to say, hey, like, it's okay if he cries, it's not a big deal.
Right.
But what ends up happening is that when he does collapse, of course, where does that boy go? He goes to the safety of the feminine, who then brings him in, and that's just an example. That could be opposite. There could be the woman, the mother, saying that to the little boy, and him seeking refuge in the masculine, in the male. But the point more so is that's an example of how the repression of emotion inside the little boy's system and inside his body, as he grows into his maturation, into his, let's just say he's coming of age, he would not be able to, he would not allow himself to feel sad or to feel tears. And then in that moment of feeling whatever it is, embarrassed, shame in his life in some way, shape, or form, he then would start to soothe with masturbation or with pornography or with something that would allow for him to flood that system, to not feel that, even if it's just for a split second. Even though it doesn't fix it, it at least allows him to not feel it enough for him to go to sleep and then not think about it until the next day.
Right. And so, as the adult,
Yeah.
talking to this 5-year-old little boy, what are you saying to yourself in that moment?
Like, isn't it, if I'm doing that type of
Uh-huh.
shadow work with myself?
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, so it would be, you just dropped the glass and you're feeling a lot of emotion about that. You might be feeling guilt. You might be feeling ashamed. You might be feeling embarrassed. Those are the emotions. Those are the words for what you're feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
that's okay to feel those things. I also feel those things. I often do those things. I often do things that I feel embarrassed and ashamed about. And that's an okay thing to feel. The importance here is how are you going to respond to what has just happened? Um, Collapsing into yourself is I'm saying too much words because you wouldn't say this to a child, but
Right.
what I'm getting at is I'm trying to work through the cognitive process of what I would say. Like
Mm-hmm.
in the situation, if that was my own 5-year-old boy, I would just grab him, say it's okay that that happened. You're okay to feel that way, the way ever you're feeling. I fail all the time too. I just the other day dropped something, so I helped to him to see that it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. Now let's together, let's go get the broom and the dustpan and let's clean this up and let's throw this away and let's restart the day. That's
Mm-hmm.
the kind of self-love, self-talk that is required in a shadow work session with yourself, in and around regulating your little boy and tending to him, so that repression doesn't turn into other types of addictive behaviors.
Rage or
Yeah,
depression or
all of
anything
the
like
above.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have used, your 5-year-old little child in a lot of, um, therapy sessions, or just a lot of conversations I've had. If this was your 5-year-old child, what would you do? Of course, I'd grab them into my arms and I'd hug them and I'd comfort them and I'd let them know it's okay, or it's going to be okay, even though it may not feel okay right now, that I'm here for you and I'll help you through this.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest aspect. Like, if you see yourself through those eyes, you would never, you know, beat or berate or
Yeah.
abuse a kid.
No,
You
you never
know,
would.
you would just take care of them and hold them and comfort them and let them know that everything is going to be okay and that you're okay.
Yeah.
You know, no matter what you did, no matter, this is something I tell my kids, no matter what bad choices you make, no matter how much you think you screw up, no matter how badly you feel about yourself or what you've done or what's going on, I'll always have your back.
Mhm.
I will always have your back. I will always be here to support you. I will always love you.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's conscious, and that's conscious parenting right there, and that creates a safe container for a child to explore and to really go for life instead of being fearful of will I be loved and accepted, or will I be rejected if I don't accomplish X, Y, and Z. And I think that's where a lot of high performers are operating from, which is the fear of failure, the fear
Mhm.
of not being accepted by their parental group or one parent. And so they go looking for that same type of love in relationships so that they can reenact those dynamics in their careers and in their friendships even. So yeah.
Well, and I feel like a lot of these shadows are opportunities for us to reparent ourselves.
Oh, 100%. And a relationship that is securely attached, that is actually precisely what I speak to, my partner about, which is we're literally reparenting ourselves and each other in this
Hmm.
process. This
Hmm.
is literally a reparenting process. That's what's going on here.
Hmm.
So this is going to be familiar territory. It's just not going to be that easy. So, yeah.
And it takes time and effort
Mhm.
and work in quotes
Absolutely.
because it's
Yeah.
unfamiliar.
Yeah, and when you do really great shadow work, especially if you have somebody that can help you lead you into some of those places, what happens is you reach peak experiences where your nervous system can hold more. It can hold more capacity, and therefore, in the holding more, we can be with our triggers, with our partners, without losing ourselves in rage or in judgment, or collapsing and abandoning and stonewalling, right? So
Hmm.
we can hold more of that and understand that it's important that we track ourselves and our partner in that experience where we're effectively protecting ourselves and holding ourselves safe, but also where we're pushing back when is necessary so that we're being respected too. So it's that kind of juxtaposition of staying protected, but also ensuring that we're being honest to our partners about the way in which their behaviors are not okay and that they're not appropriate.
Do you feel like you can do that with your partner before you've done it with yourself?
It's not possible to begin doing that with your partner until you've done it with yourself. I Because you're often judged. You're often in a state of criticism, or excuse me, you're feeling critiqued, so you're in a state of defensiveness
Hmm.
when your partner brings something up to you. And until we begin to have a relationship with those parts of ourselves that do need maturation and evolving, then we can't see the necessity for our partner to bring to us the shadows that we cannot see in ourselves, and therefore we're just rejecting them all. As opposed to when somebody brings something to us, regardless of how they bring it, we are meeting ourselves in the eyes of the other, and then in that moment we get to say, okay, well, I have a blind spot here and
Hmm.
there's opportunity for me to evolve, and so therefore I'm gonna be appreciative of this, although it's uncomfortable and although it stings ultimately.
Yeah. You're like, ooh, ooh,
Yeah.
really? I don't like that you're telling me this. It doesn't feel good. And I'm sure it doesn't feel good to my partner either, which is why they're bringing it up, right?
Sure, and to validate what they're saying can feel very powerless, because then that creates a sort of hierarchy where
Right.
you
You're
know
right. I'm wrong.
yeah, and that's it takes a lot of courage to say, for me, what I often say, and I learned this from a friend of mine, is to say, you know what, like, you're right, and more importantly, I'm wrong, like, in this situation. And I think that takes a lot of courage and guts to say, and then to say, you know what, and because of that, I'm sorry, and I want to change, and I'm committed to changing that. I'm going to take that particular part of my personality into my therapy, into my sessions, into my journals, into my dreams, into my co-parenting of my little boy, and I'm going to or reparenting that little boy, and I'm going to come back to you with what I'm going to do to change that particular thing. In the case with my partner and I, it's that I'm often not listening, right? And that's a big trigger,
Huh?
right? Because for people that are highly intellectual, like myself, I have so many things going on in my head, and so the conversation's flowing. All of a sudden, it's it's relatively, I mean, you could consider it ADD, but I don't necessarily consider it fully ADD. But what I will say is one little thing, I look at something and
Right.
boom, my brain goes phew, and then
Right.
all of a sudden I'm not actively listening. And especially in cars or in places where you're driving and you're not really sitting eye to eye. When I'm eye to eye, I don't have that issue. But when I'm just moving through life, I'm not always. And so it's a big trigger. And so it's something that I'm actively working on within myself, so that there's trust there, because
Right.
one of my goals for 2020 is that I'm more trustworthy to everyone in my life, but most especially my partner. And the way in which I can be more trustworthy is to actively and deeply listen when she's speaking. So
And so are there ways that once she brings this up, and this is something that you take responsibility for, and you try to improve because it's going to help you feel more connected ultimately, both to yourself and to your partner. Is this something that, when it happens again, that she can say, hey, you're doing that thing?
yeah, so part of it um, is the process of reprogramming that, so that isn't quite as much of a threat, which is to
Uh-huh.
say that over time, as we've had more experiences and time together, she sees that isn't coming from a place of malevolence or from a place of narcissism or a place of
Right.
whatever. Is it self-absorbed? And in some degrees, am I a selfish being? Well, yeah, I'm an animal. There's absolutely times when I'm selfish and I'm thinking about my own thing and I'm not caring about my partner or anybody for
Yeah.
that matter.
Yeah.
So for me, it's helping her and I, but we both need to help each other to see that we are ultimately selfish and that we are going to not always pay attention, and that's a part of the journey, that we're not always as conscious as we would like to be, and having grace around that, as
Right.
opposed to taking it to the next level of turning it into a fight or something.
Right. And it could just be something like, hey, I noticed that you seem distracted or not fully present. Can we pick up this conversation when
Sure.
you can come back?
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Great way to do
So,
that. So
yeah, so there are so many ways to just be an observer, which you've talked about, just being curious.
yeah.
Hey, I've noticed this, or tell me what you think about this, or tell me what's going on for you right now, so that it's both, acknowledging your effect on me
Yeah.
and me expressing how it's affecting me. And and what can I learn from this? Because I think all of these shadows are, what do I need to learn from this? What do I need to either let go of or create more of, in order to be more fully present with myself and with my partner, and in order to help maintain or improve the connection versus disconnection.
Yeah. Yeah. It's moving it from an unhealthy place to a healthier place, for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. So you had a list of things that you wrote down. We should talk about the ones that you're most interested in, because I was actually curious about what this is all about.
Okay, well, we're 13 minutes away from your deadline, so just FYI, I'll just read them, and
Mhm.
then you can. I'll read the list, and then if you want to pick one or two, then we can do that.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I just did them in alphabetical order so that I could easily find them. The first one was abandoned.
Uh-huh.
Second one was afraid, anxiety, blame, contempt, criticism, depression, disgust, fear, frustration, guilt, hidden or unseen, hurt, insecurity, judgment or judged, powerlessness, rejected, sadness, shame, and unsafe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, so what, so how do we want to unpack one of those words? Like what exactly are we striving for here?
I think how you transmute the shadow into a light aspect of yourself.
Sure. Okay. I think for me, I'll choose the abandoned. That's the top of the list. Is that right?
Yep, abandoned. Yep,
Yeah, let's do that one.
that's
So
a good one for me too.
yeah, so ultimately, I mean, this is just a theory because I have no idea, but I think at more like a spiritual or soul level, we would really strive, um, maybe at a parental level, we would strive to love our child uh, as unconditionally as possible, and to be
Mm-hmm.
attentive and present as much as we possibly can. And that, I don't have children of my own, but the reality is that's just not the way that life works. There's distractions, there's all kinds of
Responsibilities.
responsibilities, so we can't do that. So I think that ultimately a child, as they're moving in, through their developmental stages and into adolescence, they're interfacing with situations where they don't feel met in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
Their parents aren't able to co-regulate with them and to calm their nervous systems.
Their
And so,
parents aren't there for them.
yeah. And so from my perspective, you have, you kind of have, like, I think that this kind of abandonment really ties into attachment style, which is that an insecure attachment, when mom comes back in from leaving, freaks out and runs to mom, and then and does that jam, and then
Doesn't let go.
And then the avoidant attachment, when mom comes back in, baby just ignores mom and doesn't,
Or
there's no
stomps out of the room and pouts, or
and just and has to end up learning ultimately just about regulation within themselves and figuring out how to regulate their own nervous system. And they don't realize that it takes two people to co-regulate, which is why it's so difficult for them to be in relationship, because it doesn't feel safe. And so what's interesting about the research that's been done on sort of abandonment is, from what I researched, is that the actual avoidant child, who pretends like they're all cool and calm and collected when their mom comes back, they're actually over functioning more than the child as far as their nervous system and their heart rate. And so as it relates to abandonment, like how to work with that within yourself, I think there's a couple things. There's neglect, which they now, from what I understand through the therapeutic lens, they consider neglect abuse, which is that a child's just left alone. So, some might say, well, is neglect, or people might be confused about that. Like, is neglect really abuse? And I would say, one of the parts of the things that I want to talk about in my pornography courses, like covert versus overt trauma. So an overt trauma would be, a father striking a child. That's very obvious. That's abuse. Covert trauma would be this neglect, which ultimately is many abandonments over the course of the child's life over a long period of time, to the point where, with especially the the avoidant child, where they're not being attended to over a long period in their developmental stage. And so in order, if you are the avoidant, I'm not the avoidant, I'm more of the anxious attachment style, but if you are that, I think it's super important to understand that unless you penetrate that sphere and learn and accept that, you have to overcome the fact that were neglected or left alone a lot, that in order to have a securely attached and safe relationship, you have to penetrate that. If you don't, then you might end up lonely and sad and anxious and depressed for the rest of your life. And you might have
Feeling isolated.
and you might have a wonderful relationship with your pet and your friends, but there's still a void there, something that doesn't feel safe to be in relationship to another. And then if you're the anxious style in that situation, for me, that's all about, you know, usually those two attract each other. So if you're the anxious,
I was gonna say that.
because ultimately they both want to. Yeah, this one's pursuing the other one, and this one obviously wants to go. And so
The pursuer and the distancer. Yep.
and there's always a degree of healing that's necessary for the individuals, because we attract, as the opposites. And so I think for them, it's about when let's just say their mother left, and then they felt that degree of abandonment, their mother comes back and they freak out and they like go crazy and they cry and they lose themselves, they collapse. And so that's what I'm realizing as it relates to anxious attachment style, which is that when partner leaves, are you able to co-regulate with yourself? Like, are you able to go, yeah, you do need your space, your time, or yeah, you are over functioning and you need to like, have some time away. And so then that goes back to those experiences or those exercises I was talking about earlier, where you're co-regulating with that little boy inside of you, so that you're really like holding him and realizing, hey, it's gonna be okay. Like, I got you. When she's ready or he's ready to come back in, then we will reconnect, but don't collapse. I mean, it's okay to collapse, but don't collapse and think that you're not gonna have that
Get back up.
Yeah, back up. I'm here for you and with you, and we're going to be able to be okay this time around. This isn't going to be the repeat scenario of what you experienced in infancy or in your childhood development that you're, unaware of. So it's, so that's
those
kind of
things those things trigger the past experience, but then you come back to say, like, my antonyms are, instead of feeling abandoned, you feel defended or maintained or cherished or supported or cared for. And so those are the things that you need to give yourself.
Yes.
So that in order to regulate that sense of abandonment.
Sure. So as the anxious style for myself, it would be, she's not here right now. You're okay. I cherish you. I love you. You're important to me. I'm here for you and with you.
Right.
We're not like, I'm not going anywhere. That kind of communication begins to develop into that sort of shadow work. But that takes that out of the shadow and moves it into a light space, which is to say, I'm here. And then if you're more on the avoidance style, I think that for people that have the more avoidance style, attachment style, because of so much neglect, so many mini abandonments, my experience has been such that the big fear for them is that there's a powerlessness when there's rupture, because they don't feel like they want to come back in. They are at the mercy of the wave penetrating them to come back to repair. And so there's a degree of fear in the island, or in the sort of
the island. When you said that, I was like, that's exactly it.
Correct. So they don't understand that, hey, unless this person comes back, I'm screwed here. This is not this relationship, because I can't come back in, because that's not what I do. I don't go back into an unsafe environment, right? So that's where they're speaking to their little boy or little girl and going, you know what? It's okay. You don't have to do it that same way. It's okay for you to step back in, and for you to understand that there's been a sever or a rupture, and it's okay for you to seek to repair in this moment. So that's really,
I was just thinking, get on the boat in your island and just paddle right across the stream or whatever.
Get out there into those waves, and after you get through the break, it'll be a little bit more calm, right?
Yeah.
So it's just the journey, and I think that's abandonment such a big one, because we all have that abandonment wound in us, and ultimately we expected our parents to always be there, and they just couldn't be for whatever reason. and some more than others. And so we're all really experiencing that in certain little mini moments, and tracking ourselves is so crucial. And then tracking our partner's abandonment as well is that next evolution of helping them to be aware of their own shadows, because they obviously can't see them. So you're tracking yourself
Right.
and you're tracking.
Well,
Yeah.
and for abandonment also, where am I abandoning myself?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. Where am I out of integrity with self, or where am I disrespecting myself? Where am I, leaving myself behind here and not checking in? Where am I distracting or numbing? That kind of thing. Absolutely.
So really, these are all gifts to do some internal exploration and figure out, what do I need to learn here? What is this trying to show me? Where am I not
Yep.
showing up for myself, or where am I not honoring myself or accepting myself or having compassion for myself? I mean, these are the ways that we heal all of this stuff.
Yep. And the one way to do that before we close is just, we call it shadow writing. So pick a particular age of yourself, and then write to him or her, and then immediately turn the page over, and then from his or her perspective write back, and then just
Mhm.
begin the dialogue. And you write a paragraph, and then you respond to it, and then write a paragraph and respond, and you just flip the paper over. And little by little, lo and behold, we get to the root of that relationship, where we begin to relate to it instead of from it. And then we can start to kind of have that it's self shadow work ultimately. Yeah.
It's really beautiful to awaken to all of this stuff so that you're not carrying these burdens on your shoulders, right? So that you can really ultimately be free.
Hmm. Ultimately, it's about freedom, and then safety and connection, and having that safe and secure partnership that we all long for.
And that's the paradox, both within yourself, feeling completely free and completely connected to myself, and in your partnership, feeling completely free to be who you are and
Yeah.
feeling completely connected to your partner.
Yeah.
And the ebb and flows, and allowing the ebb and flows to happen both within yourself and within your partnership.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. That was so lovely.
Woohoo! Another amazing conversation, Tyson.
Absolutely.
This is beautiful, sharing this space with you, really and truly.
Yeah, well, thank you as well. I feel the same. So
Like, I just get super energized by these conversations.
I do as well. And that's probably why we're back here for the episode number 2.
I'm pretty sure there's going to be an episode 3, 4, 5, 6 and beyond. I hope we can continue to have these conversations. They're so important and so valuable and so inspiring.
Yeah. Well, let's do it. Let's keep it rolling.
Yeah, I will put your info in the show notes. Tyson Adams on Facebook, and
Yep.
adams.tyson@gmail.com.
Yep. And
And we'll look forward
yeah,
to your online course. When do you think you're going to be able to launch it?
I hope in a month or so. I hope,
Okay.
but
Okay.
not sure. It's a
As
whole
it
thing.
comes, I know it's a whole thing. Mine too. It's
Yeah.
a whole thing. So, yeah, for everybody, if you enjoyed this episode, which I'm sure you will, please subscribe and share with your friends to the Wake Up to Real Love podcast. And as Tyson and I always say, the most important relationship that you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself, so that you can be the kind of partner that you wish to have. So thank you so much again, Tyson Adams. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be with you today.
Thank you, Don.
Alrighty. Thanks, listeners. We'll see you next time. Every day, wake up to more real love. Take care.